So great to have you, Dr. Tharoor, speaking to Forbes Africa. Absolutely wonderful. And the fact that you're going to be coming to South Africa, to Cape Town. And as you know, South Africa has produced two great Nobel Peace Prize laureates. And both of them you've met, Nelson Mandela, the first Black president, and also Desmond Tutu. Maybe I should start with asking you what those interactions were and what are your best memories of your meetings with them?
They were both extremely wonderful interactions. In the case of Desmond Tutu, I actually had the honor of meeting him about three times, maybe four, because once when he visited the United Nations, of course. I should mention that in '84, when he won the Nobel Prize, I was handling refugees in Singapore, so I was nowhere near his orbit. But subsequently, when I moved into peacekeeping in New York and subsequently into Kofi Annan's office, I had the honor of meeting Desmond Tutu, and subsequently a couple of times in Davos. And what was interesting was the most memorable occasion was a lunch at which I was seated between him and Shimon Peres. I mean, it was quite an extraordinary moment to be talking to the two of them about their views on peace, on conflict, on all the various issues that were agitating my mind as a UN official and on which they had such wisdom to offer. So it really was very, very moving and impressive. Mandela, I met after he had, finished his term as president at the Carter Center in Atlanta in the US. And in the case of Mandela, it was just a one-on-one lunch, so I was very lucky. In the case of Tutu, I never really saw him alone. It was always with three or four other people. Whereas with Mandela, it was an extraordinary conversation, etched in my memory. I, wrote to various friends about it at the time. One of the things that struck me was discussing the painful challenge of confronting him on nonviolence. I mean, he was the epitome of reconciliation, but he had, after all, turned away from the path of Gandhian resistance into endorsing violent resistance against apartheid. And it was a fascinating thing. He was understandably unapologetic. I think we all remember that famous photograph of him with his fist raised fought as a young man. But he said that, look, he certainly believed and he was a great admirer of what Gandhiji taught. But he realized that the organized violence of the apartheid state could not be faced by nonviolence alone, that they would simply take recourse to force against the nonviolent, and no more than it could have worked perhaps against Hitler's forces. And therefore he felt he had no choice, but he still not claimed was the wrong word, he still stated he was inspired by Gandhian ideals and by, to some degree more, he said, by Nehru's passionate vision of freedom. But Nehru was luckier in his opponents, in that he had opponents who could be confronted with their moral inadequacies, whereas the South African apartheid state could not. But later in his life, as you know, I mean, the human possibilities emerged. That extraordinary friendship he struck with his jailer, and finally the extraordinary heart that he demonstrated upon his release, and that entire spirit of reconciliation, forgiveness, and that sort of larger than sort of conflict attitude that he brought, first of all, to his own approach to life and politics, and then to his presidency, where he became not a symbol of a kind of black triumph in South Africa, but rather a symbol of reconciliation, unity, and our common humanity. And for me, the Tutu lecture became a particularly valuable moment to address issues of peace, justice, hope, in a world increasingly riven by conflict and hostility. I mean, we've seen it now. There are two major conflicts raging on the world, where some of the basic laws of humanity appear to have been cast to the winds by the participants, where one wonders really, had Tutu been alive, what he would have said. But having heard and read him, having met and spoken to him, and having been very conscious of his legacy, I didn't hesitate for a second, even though there was at the time that the invitation came, there was a 50-50 chance that it could be the first week of Parliament. I decided I would miss Parliament if necessary in order to be able to deliver this lecture, because to stand at the same podium that had been graced by my dear boss Kofi Annan, the third African Nobel
Yes.
laureate, not mentioned in recent years, the Dalai Lama, President Cyril Ramaphosa, Mary Robinson, who's been a friend from her UN days, Grasa Machel. I mean, really extraordinary people have delivered the Desmond Tutu Memorial Lecture, and I wasn't going to pass up an opportunity to join their ranks. Really, Desmond Tutu, in many ways, his entire life was a luminous testament to the power of moral courage, just as Nelson Mandela's was. And in the case of Tutu, of course, that articulation of radical compassion at a time when Mandela was still in jail, won him the Nobel Peace Prize as far back as 1984. But I think that the larger issues that the organizers have invited me to address will take me beyond Africa, will take me beyond to global concerns of moral imagination that was certainly illuminated by the whole story of racial injustice in South Africa, but they were not. I think Tutu's life was very much a fight against every system that denied the dignity of the human person. And after the Nobel, he continued talking out, and not just on racism. After apartheid ended, he was there as a voice for women's equality, for the rights of LGBTQIA people, for climate rights and the protection of our planet. He spoke for the oppressed in Palestine. He spoke out for poverty, for the victims of poverty and marginalization across the globe. So I think in many ways what Desmond Tutu incarnated was not a selective conscience, but a universal one. And that's why delivering this lecture as an Indian politician from a different faith tradition than Desmond Tutu's. I'm a Hindu, and I've written a couple of books on my Hinduism and what it means to me and what it's taught me. And all of that, to my mind, is worth hailing as we face the audience in Cape Town, which I hope will be a good one. I'm very, very glad that it's apparently a ticketed but unpaid lecture. Anybody can come. So are most welcome to attend, and I hope they will come in large numbers, because for me, building on everything that Tutu stood for, which I think were more than just abstract ideals, but lived convictions, in his case, gives me an opportunity to cross that sort of bridge between the ideal, between the concepts of faith and hope and justice and the real world in which I live and work. And so I think that's something that I'm looking forward to very much. I'm very pleased that the organizers have created such a global platform for moral courage. I certainly do not consider myself as much an exemplar of that as so many others who have graced the podium before me. But I do believe in moral integrity, in standing up for one's convictions, in the opportunities one gets, and in the platforms available to one. So whether it was when I ran for Secretary General of the UN or whether I ran for President of the Congress Party, both of which were unsuccessful efforts, it was the courage to stand up for one's convictions that animated both those runs. And in both cases, I came closer than anyone had expected. And I will say that for me, therefore, seeing in Tutu's life and work a lot of lessons that can apply to people around the world. In Africa, yes, very much so, and that's very much part of it, but also around the world. Why not in India? Why not in Europe? For me, every part of the world can learn from these lessons.
30 years after South Africa became a democracy, we still find that, society is fragmented. There's a lot of crime, there's gender-based violence, and this very high rate of unemployment. How do you think we can bring this sort of conscious leadership and ethical leadership back and, from the classrooms to the boardrooms? What needs to change? Because this is also land that actually preaches Ubuntu, or the concept of I am because we are.
Ubuntu is a very vital principle, I know, not just of Africans generally, but specifically of the Tutu lecture. Was mentioned in their letter of invitation as sort of explaining why they reached out to me, was the whole notion that I am because we are, the shared humanity. which is, after all,
Yes.
what has taken me into the United Nations service as well. And I would say that we have to ask ourselves how we can act with moral courage in a world that's fractured by conflict, that is facing so much of inequality, and in this age of disinformation as well, of social media
Yes.
and hatred. Can shared humanity, can Ubuntu's principles, can faith guide leadership and conscience in these times? And to my mind, the answer is yes. I'm going to attempt an answer in the lecture, so I can't deliver the lecture to you. But I think
Yes.
part of it, something we can all do, is reclaim the moral imagination. Why can't we find in our shared spiritual and ethical foundations of every faith, why can't we find common ground? Why can't we use our faiths as forces for inclusion, not for division? Why can't we reach out and be large-minded enough to seek opportunities for peace, even in the midst of conflict? Can we not reach out beyond politics and ideology to choose empathy and integrity and compassion? These are really, in many ways, the foundations of coexistence, and it seems to me that that's worth batting for, that's worth speaking for in an audience in South Africa. But it's not just abstract ideas. I mean, I will be articulating, I hope, ideas worth listening to, including religious principles from different faiths and so on. But I hope that at the same time, I can talk about a convergence of faith with action, because action is what ultimately we all have to turn into. I am somebody who is straddling, if you like, in my own life, the world of ideas and the world of action. And that is that I am trying, I'm sorry, this phone ringing is a perpetual challenge here. But anyway, I am trying in many ways to try and as a writer, reach conclusions about the world, and as a politician, make decisions about the world. I mean, to move from the world of conclusions to the world of decisions daily is part of my life. So I'll be writing a column early in the morning, and then going out and taking actions to help my constituency, I hope, or constituents in the course of the day. And that's again part of what we all have to do. Solidarity is not just an abstract concept. I think if we speak out against untouchability in India or against apartheid in South Africa, we have to speak out against violence in Ukraine and Gaza as well. If we are going to challenge injustice in one place and tolerate it in another place, we are somehow letting ourselves down. If we welcome refugees from some conflicts, we should not be condoning the turning away of refugees from other conflicts. If we condemn some invasions, we can't afford to ignore other invasions. I mean, you see what I'm saying? That the language of peace and the calculus of power have to be reconciled, and it's to some degree the job of politicians to do it. I spent 29 years at the United Nations. And I worked up close. I was privileged to be involved in some of the major crises of our times. And I am convinced that it still matters. And I think I will touch on that as well, because meeting Desmond Tutu at the United Nations, as well as outside it, gave me, as it were, from his own life and principles, a masterclass in moral consistency. And what he did in chairing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was amazing. I mean, how do you find a path through truth to justice? And that was just amazing. And of course, we cannot exclude Mandela and Tutu in this, same idea, because they were both exemplars of that value. And then for someone like me who's working in national politics, but through that also with the world, because I chair the Foreign Relations Committee of our parliament, and foreign relations is one of my specific areas in Indian politics. I see the importance of contributing to building institutions that reflect the ethics we're talking about, whether it's schools that teach empathy, whether it's courts that uphold justice, whether it's economies that serve the common good and that are inclusive, media that amplifies truth rather than promotes division and fear. We can do this in our daily lives. And that's ultimately, I think, the case for action. I'll need to think through this some more before
Yeah.
I finalize my remarks, but I think you can see the direction in which I'm heading, Renuka.
So with the G20 coming up in South Africa, and you mentioned the public distrust, and this is across private public sector. How do you think these kind of conferences will further this dialogue of shared responsibility, shared commitment? How are these conferences going to help in the long run?
Well, G20 is particularly useful for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it brings together both the North and the South.
Yeah.
You may remember when India chaired the G20, it insisted upon inviting the African Union, and during the meeting, it confirmed a permanent membership for the African Union in the
Yes.
G20. So, in fact, they will be there, and that's a very important accomplishment. So, you will have voices from the global South, like in particular India, South Africa, and Brazil, but
Yes.
you'll also have the biggest economies of the world from Europe and North America, as well as China, and so on. So it seems to me a perfect platform to bring together all the principal players. And that's in some ways what the United Nations is all about, had sought to be, but in a microcosm. 20 countries instead of 200 or instead of 193 is a smaller way, with the European Union and the African Union both representing much larger numbers. I think we can have a marvelously effective forum in a world where, unfortunately, some have seen the ineffectiveness of the UN in dealing with some of the major problems of our time,
Yes.
partially because it isn't given the importance it deserves by some of the principal antagonists. Maybe in the G20, which started off as a principally economic and macroeconomic forum, but since obviously everything touches everything else, and conflict also touches economics, and economics also touches the possibilities of conflict, the G20 could be a very useful forum to get minds together and perhaps to knock heads together collectively as well. I look forward to South Africa's leadership of that
And
meeting.
as a politician in India, how do you see the relations between India and Africa evolving right now? I think we're at a great juncture. How do you see this partnership going forward?
I've been advocating for some time that we need to develop it further. India has pretty much every advantage you can you can imagine. It began as a strong supporter of independence of African countries immediately
Yes.
after its own independence. It was the first voice in the United Nations, even before its own independence was a reality. In the General Assembly session of 1946, the Indian delegate spoke out against South African apartheid and spoke for racial justice. India staunchly supported liberation movements in every part of Africa against every colonial oppressor. It has an unblemished record in that regard. Since the independence of these countries, India has consistently been a friend to Africa. What has been remarkable, it seems to me, about India's own involvement in development assistance to Africa, everybody can give sort of interest-free loans and so on. But what India has consistently done, and I won't name some of the bigger countries and richer countries that have come in with bigger projects, but gone away leaving the projects behind, but without any capacity. India has consistently built human capacity along with its projects. So everywhere it recruited Africans, trained them, made them the
Yes.
managers. It used African labor forces rather than Indian. It guided them, equipped them, and left behind, therefore, not just a building, not just a railway line or a highway, but the knowledge of how to repair it, how to maintain it, how to develop, and how to make the next one. And I think all of these are very, very important legacies, which sadly have never reached the kind of peak that I expected them to when I was Minister for Africa in the Foreign Ministry in India for a year from 2009 to 10. I had much higher hopes than I have seen fulfilled in the 15 years since. The India-Africa Summit, which I was involved with very actively during that time, instead of becoming an annual or at worst a biennial exercise, has now not met for several years, and I think it's overdue. I think that we need to get Africa and India to talk to each other much more. I would like to see Indian companies investing much more in Africa, and I would like to see very much more collaboration between Indians and Africans, not just in the public sector, but in the private as well. So I want to see much more. In fact, when I traveled to Africa as minister, I always made it a point to take Indian businessmen along as potential investors in the African countries to which I was going. One of my regrets is that I didn't last long enough in that ministry to do more with Africa. In fact, the month that I resigned in May, at the beginning of May of 2010, I was scheduled for 27 days of travel in 7 African countries. So it's a big regret to me that all of that never happened. But I just say this not to advertise my own determination and my own personal commitment to stronger relations with Africa, but also my belief that this is something that we can come back to. Everyone has had so many different priorities in recent years, but Africa must go higher up the priority scale, and I'm certainly a voice for that, and will be advocating it more, including through my own committee in the Parliament. So let's hope we can take this forward, Renika, and let's hope that Africa will see more of us.
The Tharoorian English has become famous all over the world. But my question to you is, how do you manage to remember so much of history and all the facts from that's ancient history, that's modern history, that's what's happening now? Maybe
You're
there are
very
a few clues for our
I
young
raise
audience
to say that. First of all, the Tharoorian English is a joke. It shouldn't be taken too
here.
seriously. If my business is communication, I would want to be understood by those I'm trying to communicate to. So I assure you that I do not use words that people don't understand, and you will hear plenty of evidence of that at the Tutu Memorial Lecture. There will be not one word anybody will have to bring a dictionary to look up. Okay, that's number
Right.
one. Number two, on the question of facts. It's more a question of how interested you are in something. I don't really claim to remember facts on everything or the other, but I'm obsessed with history, and I'm fascinated by history. I'm obsessed with cricket, and I'm fascinated by cricket scores and trivia as well. I'm equally obsessed by most things Indian, and certainly the policy issues that I want to engage with. Since I read up on them with interest, those facts stay in my mind. But not everything you see in an article by me just came off the top of my head. I also know how to use the internet to research. And
Right.
I encourage people not to be intimidated by any sort of torrent of facts that emerge from my pen, because I've had to look up many of them just as many other people do. And I think it's perfectly normal and legitimate. I did my PhD the hard way in the many decades before the internet was invented, and I know what it is like to go and dig up books in libraries and find footnotes and find yellowing newspaper clippings to get your facts. So I thank God for the internet every day, God and the inventors of the
What about
inventors of
AI? Do you use ChatGPT
AI. I mean,
to?
I'm an unabashed user of Google Gemini. I no longer
Right.
bother just search for a keyword. I just ask the question directly. And I almost invariably get the right answer. I shouldn't say invariably, because I've had a couple of bizarre answers also coming to me from AI. So I'm always conscious that.
Is AI able to keep up with you, Dr. Tharoor? I mean, that's my question.
Well, we always like to argue that artificial intelligence can't really compete with the natural kind, because the natural kind ideally comes attached with a personal history, a personal set of memories, and a capacity for empathy, none of which is there in a machine or in an algorithm. And I do want to say that because I certainly hope the younger generation does not use artificial intelligence as a substitute for human thought.
Yes, true.
If they can use it to complement their own thought experiences and knowledge, yes. I mean, as I say, I'm a huge fan of AI and internet for research purpose, because finding facts and figures, having done it for many years the laborious way, I can
Yes.
tell you that this is a vast improvement. And I'm sure that in many ways, the quality of research will improve massively, because literally what's available from around the world can be brought into your screen with a few clicks of a mouse, rather than having to go and physically visit library after library. I mean, I had to travel hundreds of kilometers from one library to another in the United States when I was writing my PhD. That will no longer be needed by today's young scholars, and I envy them and I applaud. I argue that the quality of their doctorate should be that much better, because they've got so much more material they can summon to their aid. So no harm in using it for research, No harm in using it to supplement or complement your own thinking. Never use it as a substitute for thought.
I'm sure I'll definitely be conveying this to our young audience, but also, Dr. Tharoor, wonderful to be speaking with you today. Is this
Thanks.
going to be your, how many trips have you already made to South Africa, if I may ask?
Four, I think. I came the very first year after independence, I mean, after the inauguration of President Mandela, though I didn't meet him on that visit. I was a guest of his government, but mainly of the foreign ministry as a UN official to educate South Africa on UN peacekeeping. In those days, I was the UN person who had acquired some reputation and notoriety, perhaps as the person handling the thankless job of looking after peace in the former Yugoslavia, which of course didn't fully exist. But as a result, I had reflected on and written about my experiences and the UN's experiences at the time. And so I came and addressed every South African institution dealing with peace at that time, including the South African Army, I'm pleased to say, the South African Foreign Ministry, a number of South African political leaders I met, the Foreign Ministry, of course, and a lot of NGOs and civil society groups, some of whom I've come across later in life, people like Jay Naidu and Kumi Naidu and people like that.
Yes.
My young people on that visit back in 95. Or 94, was it? Mandela was sworn in 94, right? So this would have been 94.
Yes.
It was exactly the time just after his first anniversary. So that was my first visit. I also managed to sneak in visits to a couple of cricket matches in the domestic competitions. No IPL or anything like that in those days. But a couple of domestic cricket matches on the weekend. Had a wonderful visit. Then I came back, I remember, with Kofi Annan for a South Summit. I came back on my own for a couple of lectures. I visited Durban for a lecture in sometime between these two things, and I spoke about my Great Indian novel to a largely Indian, especially Indian audience. I remember the shocked reaction of some young student in South Africa of Indian origin, for whom Winston Churchill was a hero. And I had to explain to him, perhaps not gently enough, why Churchill was not a hero to those of us in the colonized world, and so on. But anyway, so that's 3 or 4 visits right there. But my last visit was quite some time ago. I'm struggling to remember if I came after my entry into Indian politics. If I did, it would have been possibly once for some meeting or the other, but not in recent memory. And I forgive me for sounding so vague, since you've just been praising my memory and my historical recall. I may be better at some ancient facts now than on some of the, because I make so many trips and make so many speeches that sometimes it begins to blur in my mind. But the Tutu Memorial Lecture is going to be a very big milestone, I can assure you, for me, and that will not be forgotten when the next interviewer asks me about my visits to South Africa.
But what's next?
4 or 5 is the answer.
4 or 5. But what's next for Dr. Tharoor in India?
That's a question that I don't even know how to answer. So let's wait till you attend the lecture and we meet there. Come to town on your way to the G20.